Hi, guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. We're looking at one of the most controversial political figures of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, someone I've mentioned multiple times in other videos as well. Was Winston Churchill a hero or a villain? He's such a polarizing figure, and therefore I sort of just thought to myself that a lecture just focusing on what I think he did right and what I think he did wrong would be quite useful. So, as far as these controversies go about Churchill, one of the most relevant things for us to keep in mind is that Churchill is someone who really sort of wore his views on his sleeves. And in that sense, he was very, very different from modern day politicians. He was not the stereotype of someone belonging to the political class, because you could say that in many ways he did not belong to the political class, right? So when we look at Churchill's legacy, there are a couple of things that both his supporters and his detractors keep coming up with. His supporters constantly point out that he was the man who defeated Hitler, as in our modern interpretations of both regional and world history. Winston Churchill is often seen as the person, as the political leader who spearheaded the European effort to defeat the Nazis. And in many ways, they are absolutely true. The whole idea of Churchillian rhetoric, the whole idea of Winston Churchill infusing a certain type of national pride into the British public, particularly in the late 30s and early 40s. There is no doubt that this was very, very instrumental in the sort of overall British effort to counter the Nazis. We could look at many, many individual sort of incidents as well, and perhaps I will do individual lectures on those things later. But there were several instances in the Second World War where it would not be an exaggeration to say that anyone else in that position would have probably fallen short. Now, why do I say this? This is because Churchill is a rare breed of a soldier and a politician. Perhaps they weren't as rare a breed back then. They're certainly a rare breed now. But even if you look at Churchill's own era and the decades sort of after that, the usual stereotype of a soldier who becomes a head of state is a military dictator. So there are many, many soldiers who ended up becoming heads of state in the 20th century. But many of them were accused of being military dictators. Even in the West, many of them were accused of being military dictators, and they really were. Churchill was the only one who had the warrior spirit of a soldier and was able to combine it with the political cunning of a politician. That's why his speeches to this day resonate, because they're so clear, they're so sort of wise, and they display a tremendous, tremendous amount of wisdom that he had about how the world works. Because if you think about it today, you could be a conservative politician, you could be a liberal politician, and you will both have a huge library of Winston Churchill quotes that you can steal from for your own speeches. I mean, let's face it, even on this channel, I have used Winston Churchill quotes. I think I did a video on democracy a short while ago, and I had to quote Winston Churchill there, because there are certain topics, there are certain areas where Churchillian wisdom, Churchillian humor, Churchillian rhetoric, as I said earlier, really achieves the objective that we are seeking and gets across the point that we're trying to communicate to the audience. In particular, Churchill is known for bringing the Americans into the Second World War. Many say that he was instrumental in doing that. Of course, there are some, like, let's say, Henry Kissinger, who in his book Diplomacy, it's a huge 1,000-page book, but a brilliant book that I recommend to everybody who wants to understand world history, particularly Western European world history and American as well. He speaks about how Roosevelt had to sort of really jump through hoops in order to slowly and gradually convince the American public to join the Second World War. So Kissinger seems to feel that it was a lot more of Roosevelt's machinations that got the Americans to join the Second World War than anything that Churchill did. But we do need to keep in mind that many historians often credit Winston Churchill for this sort of, for drawing the Yanks, so to speak, into the Second World War. On the negative side, I think many of you who watch my previous videos already know what I'm going to say, right? So Winston Churchill, in certain direct ways, was responsible for the British engineered famines in India, which ended up killing millions of people. Winston Churchill had a very sort of disparaging view of colored people in general. He considered the Africans to be savages. He considered the Indians to be sort of pseudo savages who needed the British to civilize them. So essentially views that probably will not hold up in today's day and age. We've got to remember that often the excuse is that Churchill is simply a reflection of his time, that Churchill's racial views are simply what everybody back then believed. But once we go back and look at the record, it's very clear that this is not what most of the British public believed. Even in Churchill's day, he was considered to be a bit of a firebrand, as in he was considered to be somebody who held very extreme conservative views, particularly in terms of racial capabilities and things like that. However, his commitment to the greatness of the British Empire, his commitment to the values of the British Empire, all of these things are without a doubt unquestionable, which is why even after the Chamberlain government collapsed and all that in 1939-40, Churchill was still able to quickly step in, and he was able to play a very, very pivotal role in that, because nobody could have united the sort of English public, the British public rather, the way that Churchill could. Because you could disagree with his views, you could even find his views to be quite problematic, but his passion was indisputable. His passion and his commitment towards the British Empire was always something that even his enemies gave him respect for. And it was this commitment and this sort of take no prisoners attitude that many say ultimately helped the Allies win the Second World War. I will do a separate video on the specific measures that Winston Churchill took during the Second World War, and we can look at whether it's true that he played a very instrumental role in defeating the Nazis. But for this video's sort of purposes, we need to acknowledge that this is the historical consensus. So the important thing for us to keep in mind here, as you already knew, is that both sides of the argument are legitimate, and both sides are absolutely right to think of what they do about Winston Churchill. If you like content like this, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.